The paper looked ordinary at first, thin government stock, yellowed at the edges, hole-punched and stamped with a classification that once carried the weight of prison time. The ink had bled slightly into the fibers, as if the jungle humidity had reached even this far, even into the filing cabinets of distant commands. Dated June 1964. Distribution restricted. Subject line clipped and sterile. Joint Patrol Integration, Borneo Interior, declined. The refusal did not read like politics. It read like discomfort dressed in formal language, operational incompatibility, methodological divergence, risk of cross-unit interference. The phrases were neat, bureaucratic, and careful, too careful, because elite units did not turn down other elite units lightly, not in that era, not in that theater, not when the jungle itself was the greater enemy. Above the memo, a penciled notation from a senior reviewer pressed harder than the rest of the handwriting. Unexpected, clarify reasoning. The overhead fan in the Okinawa briefing hut rotated with a tired metallic click, pushing warm air in slow circles. Sergeant Marcus Hale felt the air settle damp against the back of his neck. His fatigues were already darkened at the collar, though it was barely 800. He had been standing at ease for 9 minutes, eyes forward, not looking directly at the document on the table, but aware of it like a live charge. Paper had a smell when it aged in the tropics, dust, glue, and mildew braided together. Hale knew it from map cases and field notebooks. This stack smelled the same. He watched a bead of sweat crawl down the temple of the intelligence captain reading silently across from him. No one spoke. Rank did not hurry confusion. You're familiar with the British detachment operating across the border, the captain finally said, voice low, neutral, as if neutrality could contain what the folder suggested. SAS, sir, Hale answered. Not pride, not rivalry, just recognition. A nod, then a pause that lasted too long to be procedural. They've been offered joint patrol coordination twice, both times declined by our side. Hale did not move, but something in his posture tightened. Refused support was one thing, refused proximity was another. The captain slid a second sheet forward, transcribed radio intercept summaries. No signatures, just timestamps and clipped fragments. Contact reports that didn't read like contact reports. Patrol zones swept with no engagement recorded, yet enemy supply trails went cold for weeks afterward. Villages reported hearing nothing, no gunfire, no aircraft, no artillery, only that armed men had been there one night and gone the next, and the guerrillas with them. Absence of indicators, Hale murmured before he meant to speak. The captain's eyes lifted slightly, not approval, recognition. Across the ocean and months earlier, the jungle had swallowed sound differently than training films suggested. A British patrol moved under triple canopy, boots sinking without splash into black peat. Faces were darkened not just with camouflage, but with exhaustion layered over patience. They spoke in gestures so small they were almost private. The lead scout paused, fingers brushing a bent fern stem, not broken pressed. Recently, directional, message without words. Behind them, an Indonesian irregular crouched in concealment, watching the trail they had just vacated. He had been certain he was alone. He had checked twice. The forest had agreed with him, no birds startled, no branches disturbed, no careless breath. Yet his radio handler never returned from the ridge that night, and the cooking fire they buried before dusk was found dismantled, cold, and catalogued by hands more disciplined than his own. He would later report that the jungle itself had inspected them. Back in Okinawa, Hale read the intercept line again, no shots fired, objective neutralized, no friendly visual confirmation. That's not incompatibility, he said quietly. No, the captain replied, it is. Professional respect usually traveled with curiosity, an urge to observe, exchange, refine, but the memo carried something else between its lines, distance, as if collaboration itself posed a hazard. Hale remembered the four-man debrief 2 weeks prior. Operators rotated out temporarily from a cross-border reconnaissance overlap. Hard men, quiet ones. They did not embellish. They did not spook easily. Yet each had hesitated in the same place during questioning, not around enemy numbers, not terrain, not weather, but timing. They could not explain the timing. One of them told me, the captain continued, tapping the page without looking at it, that the British patrol he shadowed moved like they'd already read tomorrow's map. Hale almost smiled at the poetry of it, almost, but the captain did not smile back. Outside, a transport aircraft groaned overhead, its shadow sliding across the corrugated roof like a passing cloud. The fan kept turning, paper corners fluttered, then settled again into stillness. Authority lived in stillness, so did unease. From the command perspective, cooperation was arithmetic, more assets, more coverage, more control. But arithmetic failed when variables refused to behave like numbers. Reports from Borneo suggested patrols that erased trails behind them, engagements that left no signatures, enemy networks collapsing without visible pressure. Effective, undeniably effective, but conducted in a way that resisted measurement. Commanders distrusted what they could not model. In the jungle, darkness was not merely the absence of light. It was a material, thick, textured, inhabited. The SAS teams treated it like an ally, not an obstacle. They entered it early. They stayed inside it longer than doctrine advised. They did not dominate terrain, they dissolved into it. To observers trained in aggressive presence, it looked less like maneuver and more like disappearance. Hale closed the folder slowly, not out of ceremony, out of weight. Elite units did not scare easily. They did not spook at shadows or myths. If they declined partnership, the reason lived somewhere beyond rivalry. What, he asked, careful with the word, did they see? The captain met his eyes for the first time since the briefing began. There was no drama there, only restraint. That, he said softly, is what they wouldn't put on paper. The fan turned, the room breathed, and somewhere under the triple canopy, in heat that erased footprints within minutes, men were already moving in a way that made other professionals step back and choose distance over understanding. The silence around them was not empty, it was deliberate, and it was working. The jungle does not begin at the tree line, it begins in the lungs. By the time Trooper Ian McKellen understands this, the air is already working against him, thick as wet cloth, heavy with rot and green life feeding on older green death. Every breath tastes fermented. Leaves decay underfoot in slow motion. Insects hum in frequencies that never quite settle into silence, only thinner and thicker layers of noise. Noonlight never touches the ground. It fractures above into shattered coins of brightness caught in the triple canopy, leaving the forest floor in a permanent, diluted dusk. He moves through it like a rumor. 4 men, no voices, no metal clatter, no snapped stems. Each boot is placed where another root or shadow already hides the shape. 40 miles in 5 days, not with speed but with subtraction, subtracting sound, subtracting trace, subtracting presence until only intention moves forward. Their faces are darkened with mud and crushed charcoal, webbing wrapped in cloth, water bottles padded. Even breath is disciplined, slow through the nose, released into sleeves. McKellen feels the sweat travel down his spine in a steady line, pooling at the belt. He doesn't wipe it. He lets discomfort exist without negotiation. The patrol commander ahead of him, a narrow silhouette with a trimmed beard and patient shoulders, raises 2 fingers without looking back. The column freezes, as if the jungle itself pressed pause. Somewhere ahead, not far, a bird stops mid-call. That is the signal, not noise, but the removal of it. Across the invisible border, Indonesian Lieutenant Sutanto studies a map already softened by humidity and thumb grease. The red pencil marks show expected British positions, patrol arcs, known trails. He knows they are wrong. The paper is too clean. The jungle is too complicated to obey lines. Still, command wants patterns, so he draws them. Boxes, arrows, projected routes. His men sit nearby cleaning rifles with slow, repetitive motions, talking in low bursts, laughter forced into the air like a defense against uncertainty. He has read the reports, not firefights, absences, camps approached without warning, sentries missing without gunfire, officers discovered at dawn, throats opened with surgical quiet, no boot prints, no cartridge brass, not even disturbed soil, just men removed from the living. He does not believe in ghosts, but he believes in professionals. 4 men cannot move like that, one of his sergeants insists. Sutanto answers without looking up. Then it is not 4 men. But privately, he suspects it is, and that possibility sits heavier. Back under the green-black ceiling, McKellen lowers himself to one knee beside a buttress root taller than a truck. Ants stream over it in disciplined rivers. He watches them for a full minute, letting his pulse slow to match their rhythm. The jungle has a tempo. Fight it and you announce yourself. Match it and you disappear inside it. A faint smell slides through the air, wood smoke, diluted by distance and moisture. Gambu. The patrol commander turns his head slightly. Eyes meet McKellen's. No words, just confirmation. Target located. The men sink lower, becoming angles and shadows rather than bodies. A machete is never drawn. Blades only come out when wood must be persuaded, never WH. It can be avoided. Vines are parted, not cut. Ferns lifted and replaced. When they cross mud, they step on roots. When they cross roots, they step on stone. When there is nothing else, they step in each other's footprints. Time stretches. Movement becomes mathematics. From Sutanto's side of the border, another patrol reports in late. Then not at all. The radio operator keeps adjusting the dial as if clarity can be tuned into existence. Static answers with indifference. Sutanto feels irritation first, then the colder emotion beneath it. Anticipation edged with dread. The jungle is loud today, but wrong, too coordinated. Monkey calls repeat with mechanical spacing. He has tracked gorillas long enough to know when nature is being imitated. He orders a reposition, double sentries tonight, no fires after dusk, no smoking. His men obey, but they do not understand the urgency. Fear that cannot be explained rarely transfers cleanly. Near the Indonesian forward camp, McKellen tastes metal at the back of his tongue, adrenaline leaking into saliva. Through layered leaves, he sees shapes resolving into human geometry, straight lines, canvas edges, the unnatural symmetry of stored crates. A cooking area, rifle stacks under cover, 2 sentries, 1 alert, 1 drifting in the posture of a man fighting sleep. Distance measured not in meters, but in heartbeats. The patrol splits without gesture. Each man already knows the geometry of the approach. This is the mathematics outsiders never see, the rehearsed intuition, the shared mental map. McKellen circles left, every step negotiated with the ground before weight commits. A branch blocks his path at chest height. He waits for a breeze that never comes, then moves it 1 millimeter at a time until it yields without complaint. The sound carries strangely here. A dropped spoon could travel 100 meters. A whisper dies instantly. They exploit physics like engineers of silence. He sees the sentry's eyelashes before the sentry sees anything at all. There is no rage in the act, no theatrical violence, only completion. A hand, a blade, a catch, a lowering. The body becomes weight instead of threat. McKellen feels the tremor pass through the man and into his own forearm, a brief electrical handshake between lives, then nothing. He holds the body until even reflex leaves it, places it down as gently as equipment. In another sector of the camp, a different SAS trooper performs the same grim arithmetic on the second guard. No signals exchanged, no confirmation needed. Silence itself confirms success. They do not destroy the camp, not tonight. Information is more valuable than spectacle. McKellen photographs documents with a miniature camera, fingers steady despite the closeness of sleeping men. He smells clove cigarettes on folded fabric, sweat soaked into uniforms, rice starch, gun oil. The intimacy feels invasive, like reading someone's private thoughts while they dream. One sleeper turns. McKellen freezes mid-motion, lungs paused between inhale and exhale. Seconds pass like suspended drops. The man settles, breathing resumes. McKellen finishes the exposure. Miles away, Sutanto wakes without knowing why. No noise triggered it, no dream, just absence, the intuitive sense that a piece of the night has been removed. He sits up, listening. The jungle speaks normally, yet something underneath has shifted the key. He checks his watch and tells himself this is nerves, nothing more. Still, he does not lie back down. Before dawn, the SAS patrol is already moving away, folding their presence behind them. Campsite undisturbed, leaves settling back into prior positions. Even insects return to interrupted routes. By sunrise, only a subtle rearrangement of small things suggests anyone passed through, and even that evidence fades by the hour. When Sutanto's missing patrol site is finally reached, there are bodies but no battle, no tracks leading in, no tracks leading out. His men stand in a loose circle, rifles held too tightly, eyes scanning trees that reveal nothing. Fear here has a flavor, metallic, dry, unmistakable. He kneels, touches still warm skin, and understands the shape of the enemy at last. Not ghosts. Hunters who have learned how to become weather. And somewhere beyond the border, 4 men are already 40 minutes and several realities away, moving faster than a company-sized force, not because they rush, but because they never have to stop and explain themselves to the jungle. Control means different things, depending on where you learned to fear the dark. At Fort Bragg, Staff Sergeant Kowalski stands at the edge of a Carolina swamp before sunrise, boots sunk ankle-deep in black water, clipboard tucked under his arm, watching silhouettes move through mist. The humidity already presses like a wet hand over the mouth. Frogs pulse in the reeds. Mosquitoes orbit every exposed inch of skin. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The candidates know the clock is rue. Enning and the patrol base must exist by the time the sun breaks the tree line. Control here is measurable. Grid squares locked down. Influence expanded. Presence established so thoroughly that resistance has nowhere left to breathe. He watches a 12-man team work through the problem. Security posted first. Claymore arcs checked. Fields of fire argued, adjusted, agreed. One man signals with 2 fingers, another mirrors it. Even exhaustion is organized. Even confusion is given a structure and a radio frequency. This is not chaos. This is saturation of ground, of relationships, of leverage. The doctrine is simple enough to say out loud: multiply force by multiplying people, build local allies, train them. Arm them, stand everywhere at once through them. Kowalski wipes condensation from his watch crystal and thinks, not for the first time, that control is a footprint you can point to on a map. Half a world away, the wind over the Brecon Beacon sounds like something alive and indifferent. It doesn't hum, it tears. Sergeant Major Lofty Weissman watches a single figure move across the Welsh moor through a spotting scope, the man below reduced to a slow, uneven dot against brown grass and slate. No team, no chatter, no reassuring geometry of overlapping arcs. Just one candidate and the weight on his back: steel, water, radio, doubt. The ground is frozen hard enough to punish every misstep. Each breath ghosts white. The candidate stops, checks his compass, adjusts 3 degrees and moves again. No one is shouting at him, no one is correcting him. Up here, error is private and accumulative. A wrong bearing isn't a deduction, it's disappearing. Weissman lowers the scope and says quietly to the younger instructor beside him, if he needs us, he's already failed. Control, in this tradition, is not footprint but absence, not domination but denial. The ideal patrol leaves nothing behind but questions. The perfect raid is discovered only by its consequences. Both pipelines break men down, both rebuild something sharper, but the architecture of the breaking is different. At Camp McCall, Kowalski walks between candidates shivering through a swamp immersion lane at night, rifles held overhead, rucks dragging like anchors. He hears teeth chattering, suppressed curses, the slap of water against load-bearing vests. Then comes the order to move as a unit, casualty carry through waist-deep mud. The strongest are redistributed to the weakest. Time penalties if spacing breaks. They pass or fail together. The lesson is hammered into muscle. You are a force multiplier only if you can multiply others. Lone brilliance is a tactical liability. One candidate stumbles, two others hook his arms without being told. Kowalski notes it without expression, but inside he marks the instinct. Good, that one understands math. In Wales, the ritual is subtraction. Weissman reviews a checkpoint card punched hours late. No anger, no lecture, just a flat nod and a pen stroke across a number that ends a career ambition. The dismissed candidate doesn't argue. His face is grey with cold and comprehension. Here, the lesson is different. If you cannot navigate alone, you cannot be trusted unseen. If your will requires witnesses, it will fail when silence is the only companion. The wind carries the smell of peat and wet stone. Somewhere beyond the ridge, another candidate is vomiting from exertion, alone with it, unseen. Selection is not trying to build cohesion, it is trying to prove self-containment. Neither instructor believes the other system produces weak men. That would be too easy, too tribal. Kowalski has read the after-action reports, four-man patrols operating for weeks, target folders built from whispers and boot prints. Weissman has studied unconventional warfare campaigns where villages turned into networks and networks into leverage. Respect exists, but respect does not erase friction. In a stateside classroom, Kowalski once told a group of candidates, "If the locals don't trust you, you don't own the terrain." He remembers a British exchange operator in the back row giving the faintest smile, as if translating the sentence into another language where the verb own didn't quite fit. In Hereford, over tea gone cold, Weissman once summarized his philosophy to a liaison officer. If they know you're there, you're late. The divide isn't noise level or body count or courage under fire. It's the definition. What does it mean to control a battle space, to flood it with influence and partners and visible commitment, or to pass through it like weather, altering outcomes without announcing presence? History built both answers honestly. The American lineage runs through resistance movements scaled up, train, equip, coordinate, expand. The British lineage runs through deserts and jungles where survival favored the blade over the hammer, slip in, cut precisely, vanish before the echo. Neither is more elite. They are optimized for different truths. But optimization creates friction when truths overlap. In joint exercises, Kowalski has watched small British teams refuse additional attachments, trimming manpower the way a surgeon trims dead tissue. He felt the discomfort of it. Too thin, he thinks, too brittle if surprised. In similar scenarios, Weissman has watched American-led elements bring layers, partner forces, enablers, redundancy, and felt a different unease, too visible, too loud in the pattern of life. Both are right inside their own geometry. Night falls in two hemispheres at once. In North Carolina, a team patrol moves with deliberate noise discipline, but still a detectable mass, brush displaced, water disturbed, presence asserted. In Wales, a lone figure crawls the last meters to an observation point, belly against frost, becoming another shadow among shadows. Two philosophies of power, both born from hard ground and harder lessons, moving toward a century where battlefields are shared. And the uncomfortable question waits there in the dark between them. When saturation meets invisibility, when footprint overlaps ghosts, who is really in control and who is exposed? The jungle did not feel like terrain anymore. It felt like a listener. February 1965. The insertion came without ceremony, no heroic briefing, no dramatic send-off, just a damp dawn, a narrow clearing carved by rotor wash, and four Americans stepping into a world that did not move at their speed. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale felt it immediately before a word was spoken. The British patrol did not greet them like guests. They absorbed them like extra weight. D Squadron, SAS, stood already camouflaged by stillness alone. No wasted motion, no idle scanning, no restless fingers on triggers, just watchfulness, deep and predatory, like men already inside the next hour. Hale would later write that this was the first warning sign. They were not preparing to patrol. They were already mentally there. Corporal Geordie Thompson, second in command of the patrol, gave Hale a nod that was almost friendly. Almost. His face was mud-streaked, eyes pale and alert under the brim of a sweat-darkened hat. He checked Hale's kit with a glance that took inventory faster than hands could. Not judgment, calibration. "You'll want that taped," Thompson murmured, tapping a loose buckle that could click against metal. "Sound travels strangely here." The patrol stepped off during what Hale assumed was the wrong time of day. Enemy stand to period. Highest alert window. American doctrine avoided movement then. The SAS chose it deliberately. They moved not in file, but in drifting geometry, spacing elastic, shapes changing with the vegetation density. No hand signals, no whispered commands. Direction passed through touch alone, a squeeze on fabric, two fingers pressing a shoulder blade, a slow downward palm meaning freeze. Hale found himself navigating by pressure more than sight, as if temporarily blind. The jungle air clung wet and warm, but beneath it rode a sharp medicinal scent. Tiger balm. He caught it again when Thompson passed close, camphor, menthol, clove, rubbed into sleeves and necklines, not for comfort, for confusion. To break the human smell, signature dogs and trackers followed. They paused beside a shallow depression where leaves collected darker and wetter than the surroundings. The patrol commander crouched, pressed fingers into the soil, then brought them to his nose like a sommelier reading wine. Thompson leaned toward Hale without looking at him. "Turned yesterday, wait through here, 3, maybe 4. Hale saw nothing, no print, no bent grass, just earth. The insects changed pitch as they moved. Hale noticed it only after the SAS had already altered direction twice to match it. Mosquito density, ant column disruption, absence where there should be presence, navigation through biology, not compass headings. Hours passed measured only by discomfort, sweat pooled under gear straps, leeches found wrists and boot tops. No one spoke, no one checked watches, time was irrelevant to concealment. At hour 6, or maybe 8, they stopped completely. No explanation, just a gradual settling, each man lowering into vegetation like something folding back into itself. Hale mirrored them, unsure why. His thighs burned within minutes. Ants crawled across his knuckles. A vine pressed against his cheek like a damp rope. They did not move again for 11 hours. Later, Hale would struggle to explain that duration to superiors. It sounded exaggerated even to him, but stillness became the mission. Breath slowed, muscles tremored, then numbed. The jungle's noise built, normalized, then, at some unmarked point, accepted them as furniture. Thompson's inner clock counted threats, not minutes. He felt the American beside him fighting the instinct to adjust posture, to scratch, to clear a throat. Discipline was visible in micro-tension. Good soldier, Thompson judged silently, just loud in the bones. The silence broke row. NG. Not by sound, but by subtraction. Birds cut off mid-pattern, insects flattened into absence. The jungle inhaled and held it. Thompson's fingers pressed backward, without looking, a coded warning flowing body to body down the hidden line. Contact approaching. The Indonesian scout appeared like a thought resolving into shape, 20 meters out, moving carefully but not carefully enough. Eyes scanning high instead of low. Rifle held ready but not intimate. Alone, but connected to others by confidence. Hale saw him at the same moment the SAS point man did. What followed happened without audible violence. Thompson moved with shocking softness, 2 steps, a glide, a hand clamping the mouth, blade entering under the rib with surgical economy. No cinematic struggle, just a human body surprised and then slack. Hale felt his pulse slam in his throat. Training prepared him for gunfire, grenades, shouted commands. Not this surgical erasure, close enough to smell breath, close enough to feel the departing heat. But it was the next part that rewrote his understanding. Thompson lowered the body gently, positioned it behind a buttress root, then leaned close to the dead man's ear as if listening to a secret. Moments later, voices drifted through the trees, a search element calling softly. Thompson answered them. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough. Matching tone, cadence, irritation, a complaint about direction, a muttered instruction to shift left toward a stream bed. The responding voices adjusted course immediately. Hale stared at him, shock held behind discipline, watching deception performed not with radios or codes, but with borrowed identity. Thompson didn't grin, didn't celebrate. He simply returned to stillness like nothing had occurred. The patrol did not capitalize, they did not pursue, their victory condition was absence. Hours later, when movement resumed, Hale noticed something else. The SAS were no longer following their original route. They had pivoted entirely, not away from danger, but away from pattern. Contact meant adaptation. Routes died the moment they were touched. By the second night, Hale's confidence had thinned into professional humility. He recorded mental notes automatically, techniques, timings, scent masking, biological navigation, but beneath the analysis sat a quieter admission. This was not just skill, it was philosophy. The SAS did not patrol through the jungle. They negotiated permission from it. During a rare halt, Hale whispered, barely audible, "How do you know when you've been detected?" Thompson answered without turning, "When the jungle starts lying." No elaboration. On hour 90, fatigue distorted perception. Shapes leaned where they should stand straight. Light fractured through canopy gaps like underwater glare. Hale caught himself imagining movement where none existed until Thompson froze again. This time, the silence held longer, too long. Enemy voices returned, but cautious now. Wider spacing, slower cadence, learning behavior, the adaptation had begun. Invisible warfare had met an enemy willing to adjust. The patrol withdrew without engagement, but not without cost. Every step back felt heavier. In his later classified report, Hale would choose his words carefully, not out of fear, but respect. He would not call it superiority. He would call it difference so profound it bordered on another discipline entirely. The extraction request went up early, framed as schedule compression, logistics efficiency, weather risk, professional language masking shaken assumptions. As the helicopter lifted them out, Hale looked down at the unbroken canopy and understood the uncomfortable truth forming beneath his admiration. Invisibility was not a permanent condition. It was a contest. And somewhere below, the jungle was already deciding who still belonged inside it. The mythology had always been clean, precise, surgical, a handful of men slipping through jungle shadow and returning without a trace, 3 killed in action, 5 listed as missing, numbers that fit neatly into the margins of a classified report. But numbers do not carry the smell of rot. In 1968, in a narrow RAF evaluation room at Holton, Dr. Margaret Fontaine sat across from men who had learned to erase themselves. The room was painted an indifferent beige. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, the sound thin and electrical, like insects trapped in glass. The air smelled of paper files and antiseptic polish. Outside, England was quiet, damp, civilized. Inside, the jungle had followed them home. Trooper David Sterling, Jr., sat rigid in the metal chair, hands resting on his knees with deliberate stillness. He carried a name heavy with expectation. His father had founded the regiment, had built the myth of it. Ghosts before ghosts were fashionable, and David had volunteered to inherit that silence. His fingers trembled. Not visibly, not to the untrained eye, but Dr. Fontaine noticed the minutes. Vibration at the knuckles, the way the skin along his thumb bore crescent scars from unconscious biting. She had seen it in others. Men who had once steadied rifles in monsoon downpours now could not hold a teacup without calculation. "Do you sleep?" she asked gently. He paused. In that pause lived the jungle. In Borneo, sleep had never been full. It had been negotiated. A shallow descent into darkness where one ear remained open to the pitch of insects, to the brittle snap of a twig beneath weight that did not belong. The men had slept in hammocks strung above mud that swallowed boots whole. Leeches found them anyway. Rain soaked through canvas and skin alike. Every rustle was a question. Every silence a warning. He cleared his throat. Not much. Across Britain, casualty records were tidy. 3 KIA, 5 missing. The missing were filed in a separate column, cleaner that way. But weeks after their patrol had failed to return, 2 of those missing were discovered deeper along the Kalimantan border. Not executed, not shot. Dead from wounds that had festered in the heat. One had taken shrapnel in the thigh during a brief contact with Indonesian irregulars. The extraction point was compromised. Radio silence was mandatory. To signal for help would have exposed months of deniable operations. So the patrol did what ghosts do. They vanished further. The jungle does not forgive hesitation. Infections set in quickly. Fever followed. His mates carried him for as long as they could, muscles burning under humid weight, boots sinking in sucking mud that made every step a negotiation with gravity. At night, they wrapped the wound in strips torn from shirts, changed dressings with hands that shook from exhaustion. There was no morphine left by the 4th day. He begged them not to call it in. They obeyed. By the time they found his body, weeks later, the jungle had already begun reclaiming him, a rifle propped neatly beside what remained, discipline to the end. Dr. Fontaine had read the file in silence before meeting Sterling. The official report was restrained. Infection secondary to field injury. No commentary on the decision not to break cover. No acknowledgement that invisibility had been prioritized over survival. She watched Sterling's jaw tighten when she mentioned the patrol. "You did what you were trained to do," she said. He looked at her then, something raw flickering beneath restraint. In the jungle, training was oxygen. It kept panic contained, gave shape to fear. But in England, in a quiet room where clocks ticked audibly, the logic felt brittle. "We couldn't compromise the position," he replied. The words were automatic, rehearsed, yet beneath them was something else, an unasked question about whether the position had been worth the man. In another office across the base, files accumulated. Fontaine's notes began to show a pattern: dissociation, emotional flattening, men describing firefights in clinical detail but unable to recall the sound of their own children's laughter, hypervigilance that did not dim with distance from the border, sleep fragmented into 90-minute intervals as if the body refused to believe it was safe. Conventional infantry returning from Aden or Cyprus showed trauma, yes, but it was different. There had been clear fronts, defined battles, rotations that ended. In Borneo, there was only ambiguity, cross-border operations that officially did not exist, engagements that could never be publicly acknowledged, victories that required silence. One sergeant described walking through London at night and mapping sightlines automatically, identifying choke points, noting where shadows pooled thickest. He could not turn it off. The city became another jungle of angles and threats. Fontaine would later write, in a private memorandum, that prolonged deniable warfare appeared to erode the psyche differently. The men were not just fighting an enemy, they were maintaining a continuous performance of invisibility. To survive meant to suppress fear, pain, doubt, without release, without recognition. And recognition matters. Back in the jungle years earlier, on a moonless night near the border, Sterling had crouched with his patrol as distant mortar thuds rolled across the canopy. The sound traveled strangely through trees, muted, absorbed, yet heavy. He remembered the way the darkness felt thick, almost tangible against his face. Sweat crawled down his spine. Beside him, one of the younger troopers whispered a joke too quietly to hear. They all grinned anyway. That flicker of humor was oxygen. But after weeks without contact from higher command, without even confirmation that their presence mattered, a different weight settled in. Were they shaping events or simply enduring them? The mythology said elite men thrived in isolation. The records suggested something more fragile. Fontaine leaned back in her chair as Sterling described the tremor in his hands. He tried to frame it as irritation, as inconvenience, but when she asked about the faces of the two men found weeks later, his voice faltered for the first time. "We did everything right," he said softly. "Everything right." And still, they died alone, beneath a canopy that swallowed sound. In Jakarta, Indonesian commanders had their own calculus. Confrontation was a game of shadows, probing British resolve without triggering open war. The SAS presence was suspected, but rarely confirmed. The ambiguity was strategic. It kept escalation contained. But strategy rarely accounts for infection, or insomnia, or the slow fracture of men trained never to show strain. By 1970, Fontaine's data indicated that SAS veterans from Borneo exhibited higher rates of dissociative symptoms than comparable units. They were functional, disciplined, decorated, yet internally fragmented. The cost of constant hyper-awareness without communal acknowledgement had etched itself into their nervous systems. Sterling would leave her office that day walking upright, posture impeccable. Outside, the English sky was pale and unthreatening. Cars moved predictably along wet roads. No one watched the tree lines. And yet, he would scan them anyway. The mythology of ghosts endures because it is useful. It suggests efficiency, control, mastery of terrain and fear. But if the method demands men become specters even to themselves, if survival requires suppressing pain until it turns inward, then the calculus shifts. Did the SAS avoid joint operations because they were superior, or because prolonged isolation was breaking the very men who perfected it? In the sterile quiet of evaluation rooms, beneath fluorescent light that revealed every tremor, a different battle was unfolding. Not against insurgents in dense jungle, but against memory, against sleeplessness, against the silence that followed them home. And if modern warfare increasingly rewards invisibility, deniability, precision, small footprints, who decides how much unseen suffering is acceptable? The jungle may have been thousands of miles away. But for some of them, it never stopped breathing. In 1991, the desert did not whisper the way the jungle had. It roared. Colonel James Maddox, then a young captain with a Green Beret team pushing north through the flat, burning expanse of Kuwait, remembered the first time he realized the war had changed. He wasn't listening for movement in the dark. He wasn't reading bent grass or broken twigs. He was staring at a glowing screen inside a humming tactical operations center, air thick with diesel fumes and recycled air, watching icons glide across a digital map like obedient constellations. Above him, satellites stitched the battlefield together in invisible threads. Predator drones, new, awkward, mechanical birds, circled miles overhead. Air superiority was absolute. The sky belonged to America. For Maddox, the silence was different now, not the suffocating, breath-held silence of Borneo's triple canopy. This was electronic silence, the kind broken by radio chatter, keyboard taps, the distant concussion of precision-guided bombs striking targets that men never physically saw. The SAS were there too. Older operators who had grown up in the long shadow of jungle doctrine stood beside their American counterparts in the sand and steel glow of coalition headquarters. The rivalry that once smoldered in the humidity of Southeast Asia softened under the weight of shared intelligence feeds and synchronized airstrikes. Integration came not through shared suffering in darkness, but through bandwidth. By the time Maddox deployed again in 2002 into the mountains of Afghanistan, the transformation felt complete. He stood on a ridgeline outside Gardez, wind slicing through his gloves, staring down at a valley where Taliban fighters moved like scattered ants. He didn't need to guess their route. A drone operator in Nevada tracked them in real time. A satellite passed coordinates. Within minutes, jets carved white contrails across the sky and erased the problem in a blossom of orange light. The terrain was still brutal, knife-edged ridges, lung-searing altitude, but the war felt mediated, filtered through screens. Inside the TOC, monitors glowed in rows. Young analysts leaned over keyboards, reading patterns instead of footprints. The hum of generators replaced the insect chorus of jungle nights. Maddox felt pride. The system worked. Casualties were lower. Operations were precise. The integration with British units was seamless. Shared comms architecture, shared targeting protocols. The old friction seemed almost quaint. And yet, late at night, when the screens dimmed and the generators idled low, he would think about something an SAS sergeant had once said to him over bad coffee in Helmand. "If the sky goes dark," the Brit had murmured, eyes steady, "who remembers how to disappear?" At the time, Maddox dismissed it as nostalgia. The world had moved on. Information dominance had replaced jungle craft. Why spend weeks learning? To stalk silently when a drone could loiter for hours? Why memorize terrain when GPS painted it in perfect resolution? The Borneo doctrine, the art of becoming invisible inside the earth itself, felt like a museum piece, a romantic relic of an analog war. But wars have a way of circling back. In 2014, at Fort Bragg, Major Trev Harrison stepped off a transport plane into humid Carolina air that carried a faint echo of something older. The base was modern, efficient, rows of buildings humming with fiber optic cables and encrypted networks. Inside classrooms, operators studied satellite imagery projected in razor-sharp detail. They manipulated digital terrain models with styluses and touchscreens. Harrison watched them quietly before he began his first session. He was SAS to the bone, lean, weathered, his movements economical. He had grown up in a force that had once vanished into Borneo's green abyss. Now he had been invited, quietly, without press releases, to teach advanced fieldcraft. The phrase sounded almost academic, harmless. On the training grounds beyond the barracks, he led American Green Berets into dense woodland at dusk. No drones, no radios, no GPS, just compass, map, and instinct. The first night was clumsy. Boots snapped twigs. Flashlights flickered when they thought he wasn't looking. Harrison said little. He simply disappeared. One moment he stood 10 meters ahead. The next, he was gone. The forest swallowed him whole. The Americans fanned out, scanning, breathing harder than they expected. Without screens, the dark felt heavier. Every rustle carried weight. They were elite soldiers, combat veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, yet the silence pressed against them in unfamiliar ways. Their spatial awareness, once augmented by overhead feeds, now depended on the angle of a slope, the direction of wind against sweat-soaked collars. Harrison reappeared behind them an hour later, tapping one man lightly on the shoulder. "Dead," he whispered. There was no mockery in his voice, only instruction. Maddox, now retired but visiting the course as an observer, stood at the tree line and watched. The glow of the base in the distance felt like another world. He felt something tighten in his chest, not regret, but recognition. Technology had made them powerful, unmatched, but it had also insulated them from the raw negotiation between body and terrain, between breath and silence. In a debrief tent lit by a single lantern, Harrison spoke plainly. "Satellites fail, signals jam, batteries die, the Earth doesn't." The words hung there, simple and unadorned. Maddox saw young Green Berets nodding slowly, sweat streaking dirt across their faces. They were relearning how to feel the ground through their boots, how to read shadow not as absence of light, but as concealment. They were rediscovering fatigue, the kind that sharpened senses rather than numbed them. The rivalry that once divided SAS and Green Berets had become something else. A quiet exchange, a professional humility. Integration had succeeded on American technological terms, yes. The alliance had matured, but beneath the fiber optic cables and drone feeds, something older was being reintroduced, like a seed preserved in cold storage, brought back to soil. The wheel had turned. As warfare drifted toward algorithms and autonomous systems, as artificial intelligence promised predictive battles fought at machine speed, men like Maddox and Harrison stood at an uneasy intersection. They understood the power of the new era. They had benefited from it, survived because of it. But they also knew the fragility of systems built on invisible networks. In the quiet woods of Fort Bragg, under a canopy that swallowed light much like Borneo once had, the lesson was simple and unsettling. Darkness had not been defeated, it had merely been outpaced. And if one day the machines went silent, if satellites blinked out and screens went black, who would remember how to move through shadow without leaving a trace? The question lingered in the humid air, unanswered, as the soldiers stepped back into the forest and the light behind them faded.